Nearly a year into President Biden's term, the return to the new Iran nuclear deal remains elusive, and the new cast of characters on Iran's side of the table is driving a hard bargain. After several days, Iran presented European powers with revised drafts on sanctions removal and nuclear commitments. Iran's chief negotiator has laid out a set of demands, including the immediate removal of all sanctions imposed under Trump, and guarantee that no future administration will withdraw from the deal again. The United States does not want to remove sanctions related to Iran's proxy wars in the region and other issues. And it is impossible for Biden to pledge that a future administration won't undo any agreement. European diplomats have warned that unless Tehran changes course quickly, negotiations were headed for collapse, but Iran didn't, and the deal is closed at the moment. The United States put three options on the table after the deal collapsed: a plan to increase even more sanctions, a plan with diplomacy, and another plan which involves military action. We'll discuss all three, but we'll mainly focus on the military option as the United States and Israel happen to stress it more often. I'm your host Isev, and welcome to Defense and Geopolitics. One of the options is military action. The threat of a military escalation will grow. Israel, the main partner of the US in the region, proposed a plan to bomb Iran nuclear facilities. US strikes on Iranian nuclear targets could set back the nuclear program temporarily, but hand Tehran a public relation win at home. US support for any Israeli military action could embroil the United States in a broader conflict involving Iranian proxies in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. This plan is potentially very difficult for the US, even if it's the current greatest superpower in the world. One of the obstacles that the US will face if it chooses to go with this option are quite a few. First, Iran has a major heavily armed proxy militias, which can be a great cause of concern for the US allies in the region. They are trained and have a broad range of military equipment. The second obstacle is Iran's military. While it's not as powerful as the US military, Iran has been developing and putting a lot of resources on making military equipment that costs much less to produce but is purposely designed to exactly counter the US heavy equipment. A good example is that Iran employs a big navy of small frigates, patrol crafts, submarines, and small missile boats. And all of them armed with tons of advanced anti-ship and anti-air missile capabilities. It is believed by experts to be a counter to the great US Navy by launching a lot of anti-ship missiles at each target and overwhelm them by numbers. Iran also has some modern and decent anti-air systems that it developed domestically, which proved to be combat effective, like the Bavar 373 and the Khordad, which can be a problem to the Allies' air operations. And Iran also produces some other impressive equipment, like tanks, artillery, mobile launchers, small arms, and even drones. Aside from that, Iran has a pretty solid military personnel, like the elite Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, which employs most of Iran's military equipment. Another obstacle would be the great ballistic missile arsenal. Having anywhere from 500,000 to more than 1 million short and medium-range ballistic missiles that would target US bases near Iran, but in order to do that, Iran would probably send more than 100 towards each base, overwhelming any anti-air systems. All of this, but the US can still find effective strategies to counter all of that because of the great military capabilities they have. Another obstacle is Iran's allies in the region, like China and Russia, which can be drawn into the conflict. The last obstacle it would face is the huge money it will cost going to war with one of the largest armies in the world and would cost trillions of dollars, which the US is very less likely to afford. Another option and strategy would be creative diplomacy. The United States needs to keep the door to diplomacy open and consider potential alternatives. Iran has made a number of demands that go beyond the scope of the previous deal, including the removal of all sanctions imposed by the past two administrations and guarantee that the future administrations will not withdraw from the deal. The United States should first offer to discuss those concerns as part of a new deal that would require greater nuclear restraints. Iran will almost certainly reject that offer. But even if Iran accepted, in principle, it would take a long time to negotiate, and the United States and its allies would still need to find a near-term stopgap measure to slow Iran's nuclear progress. The last option is to put maximum economic pressure on Iran. Critics will assert that this is merely a continuation of the Trump administration's maximum pressure strategy, but it would not be. The Trump administration aimed to push Iran towards capitulation or collapse. This strategy would instead aim to demonstrate that Iran cannot sustain its economy and international standing without engaging seriously in diplomacy. The Raisi government has openly acknowledged the poor state of the country's economy, but it believes it has solutions, such as boosting industrial production and focusing more intently on Russia, China, and its neighbors. That can neutralize the effect of sanctions. The West would aim to show that it cannot. Additional pressure could take many forms, including aggressively enforcing existing sanctions, implying new targeted sanctions, triggering snapback at the UN Security Council, and censoring Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency's Board of Governors. Trying to convince China to cut down its oil imports will be a difficult but essential aspect of this strategy, but compared with a decade ago, US relations with China are much worse, making collective global action against Iran less likely. China has supported Iran diplomatically and economically more than any other party to the nuclear talks. The US and its allies are definitely not looking to keep the status quo. One of these options will definitely make it. Even if the military option is the least expected plan of action for the US, it still has a possibility in the near future. Iran want the sanctions to be lifted badly. But Iran said even if the sanctions aren't removed, we will mainly focus on an Eastern-oriented policy. Thank you so much for watching the video. Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe. I've been your host Isaac, and I'll see you in the next video.